We're discussing ego and leadership and how we address ego in the workplace. So many leaders are less effective precisely because of their ego. They have an ego that is way over the top, but the absence of ego isn't the answer. A healthy ego is necessary to confront the challenges of business and to lead a team forward to success. Now, for most, if not all of us, our ego, its relative strength, whether others see it as too much or too little, this is in our blind spot. While others may be arrogant or unconfident, we see ourselves as just fine. It's only those other folks who have a problem. How can you see where you really are and strike the appropriate balance between having too much or too little ego? David Marcum and Stephen Smith wrote a really helpful book on this topic over a decade ago. It's called Egonomics: What Makes Our Ego Our Greatest Asset, Our Most Expensive Liability. And it explains what healthy ego is, what it looks like when we start getting out of balance, and how, in very practical ways, we can rein ourselves in and return to a beneficial ego state. 2 weeks ago, I sat down with Mike Todd, CEO of Learning Unlimited Corporation, to talk about ego. Learning Unlimited was the first outside entity that Marcum and Smith certified to teach Egonomics, and it has been one of Learning Unlimited's staples in both leadership training and executive coaching ever since. In our first conversation, we're talking about the importance of ego and how to recognize when you're out of balance. And I am here today with Mike Todd, CEO of Learning Unlimited Corporation and executive coach. And we're here talking about how we address ego in the workplace so that ego becomes an asset and not a liability. We've all experienced leaders, others with whom we worked, where their ego seemed out of balance, where they didn't seem to even be aware of this. And yet that may have been the biggest challenge that we had in our relationship with them. So ego, talk a little bit. First of all, define. When we're talking about ego, what the heck are we talking about?
Ego is, it's how we see ourselves, and it has everything to do with our confidence. A lot of times confidence does not necessarily equal competence. And a lot of times when we're younger or earlier in our career, that tends to be a real challenge for us. You need to have a little bit of that confidence, perhaps overconfidence, that helps you tackle roles, tasks, things that are a bit over your head, but you don't want to go too far. And frequently, perhaps we've seen in ourselves, and we certainly perhaps more easily see in others, when confidence is out of whack, and clearly this person's ego is kind of getting the best of them. And when that occurs, it really makes it hard to follow those kinds of leaders, and sometimes it can be confusing in terms of what it is that we do about the situation to help this person better see reality.
Okay. So interesting. We talk about, you talk both sides of it, and what I just heard you say was that ego can be a liability, can get in the way, but it's also something that we need if we're going to take on challenges. If we're going to climb those hills and bring others along with us, they need to see people who are confident. So the key sounds to be like, how do we keep this in balance, right? And we know other people obviously have a problem with this, but a bigger challenge, I think, is seeing it in ourselves. I can always tell that somebody else's ego's out of balance, but I don't have any problem with ego, right? I can tell when Mike has the issue, but not me.
Yes.
And of course, I say that tongue in cheek because I probably need it as much as anybody, but I don't know how to see it. And that's what I wanted you to kind of walk us through today, Mike. I know that you help leaders, executives, as part of your work, kind of look and understand themselves, grow in their own self-awareness. So how can we look at this? How can we begin to recognize ego and where it is and when it starts getting out of whack?
Well, there are, out of the book Egonomics, which I use as a tool in coaching, which of course we introduced to you probably 5 or 6 years ago, and Learning Unlimited's used for a little more than a decade now. It talks about specifically some early warning signs that can let you know when somebody's ego is out of whack. So the first early warning sign is listed in the book to give us an indication that ego has gotten out of whack is being comparative.
Okay. All right. So what does that mean? Like, give me a definition.
So being comparative is when you're overly comparing yourself or trying to measure up to somebody else's standard, which in some ways is healthy because you want to have a reference point for what's possible. But what frequently happens with leaders, and especially well-intentioned newer leaders, is they will look at somebody else and say, I want to do what she did, or I want to do what he did. I want to be like that guy.
Okay, but isn't that a positive?
It is, but if you don't take into context your strengths, your capabilities, you may be measuring up to somebody else that actually is doing things at a level that perhaps you can't realize, or you may be measuring yourself to somebody else at a level that's much lower than your possibility and your capability in terms of what you can achieve.
Okay. So what does it look like? So you told me what being comparative is, but then how might I recognize someone who is being comparative in others? What behaviors would I see?
Well, you just hear a lot of language talking about other people, or over there they do this, over there they do that. What you want to try to coach and produce is more of what's really possible for us, or what's really possible for me, or what's possible for this individual, as opposed to being overly comparative or competitive as reference to somebody else and what they've achieved.
Okay. So early warning sign number 1 is being comparative. What is early warning sign number 2?
Early warning sign number 2 is one that we've all seen, and I particularly have been guilty of at many points in my career, and particularly early on, and that's being defensive.
Okay, all right. So again, define.
Okay.
I think I know what that means, but go ahead.
Being defensive for the purposes of thinking about ego frequently manifests itself in perhaps meetings and conversations where someone seems to be so overly invested in their idea and making sure that it is the one that's chosen or the one that wins, that in reality we can't really step back and see something better or something different. And that is a frequent hang-up that you see in business and with leaders.
Okay, all right. Does it also extend to receptivity to critical feedback?
Oh, of course it does. And in fact, in critical feedback situations, many of us are almost automatically defensive, which doesn't help us hear what we need to hear, because it frequently is considered code for here's what you're doing wrong. When in reality, why wouldn't we want to hear when we're doing things wrong, or we could do things better? And yet that defensiveness kind of gets in the way of our growth.
Yep, I actually heard somebody speak yesterday about when our identity at work and what we do becomes a substitute for who we are as an individual, that then any kind of criticism, even when it's healthy and needed, is felt as a personal attack. So anyway, it really resonated.
Let me add one thing to that.
Okay.
When we're defensive, we're frequently attached to an idea that feels like it's our identity, and we have to recognize that we can have strong-held beliefs, opinions about a particular path, but we can really step back and realize that that idea isn't our identity. And so let's attack this idea so that we can perhaps get a better solution with different thinking and being able to look at it from different viewpoints.
Very good, very good. Okay, so we've got being comparative, we've got being defensive. What's warning sign number 3?
Showcasing Brilliance. This is another one that we've all seen and can be particularly painful when it's happening.
I'm sorry I'm laughing at that only because as we worked through Egonomics, and that was part of the facilitation and coaching, we made it part of our work here at Learning Unlimited. By the way, if you haven't seen from other videos, I used to work with Mike Todd as his CEO for a while. Yes. But anyway, the point being, Showcasing Brilliance was the area that I probably suffered from the most. That was when I started feeling insecure. It was all about, oh, well, let me show you how smart I am. And so how else would that look when someone is showcasing brilliance, Mike?
Well, it tends to be pretty obvious because it's one of those somebody's excited about what their capabilities are, what's possible, what they can do. Hey, look at me, here's what I've accomplished, like that young kid or on the school ground, hey, everybody look at me, I just won, or whatever. It's not about bringing our strengths and our capabilities to the table. It's about
Which is what we want, right? Which is what we want.
That's what we want. It's about putting ourselves in front when we shouldn't be putting ourselves too much in the front. It's about kind of retracting ourselves, pulling ourselves back a little bit so that other people can contribute, other people can chip in their thoughts, their ideas, and that it's not all about me or it's not all about Rob.
Right. So when I experienced it in myself, or displayed it rather, I would tend to start talking in concepts and languages that, sounded professorial, right? Yeah. I knew more than everybody else. Mm-hmm. Anyway, real funny. And so what's number 4? So we've got being defensive, being comparative, showcasing brilliance. What's number 4?
The 4th one is seeking acceptance.
Okay, but now I want acceptance. I would say you and I would say everybody wants acceptance. Mm-hmm. What's wrong with that?
Well, it's natural. We all want to be accepted for sure. And also, it can be really unhealthy. It can be a sign that perhaps we're underconfident. If our confidence comes from the approval of others or an unnecessary and sometimes relentless seeking acceptance and the pats on the back from those that are around us, that can be a real problem.
Okay. So it's interesting as we look at the 4 early warning signs. I could also say that at some level, each of those reflects normal, appropriate behaviors. Almost like when you just take it a little bit too far, that shows that you're not coming from a place of confidence, mm-hmm. right? So the first one is being comparative. Mm-hmm. On the one hand, I would say it's important to know where we stand relative to our competitors and others. Sure. It's just when that becomes the sole focus and my measure of how I'm supposed to be. Would you agree with that? Does that resonate?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And to your point, these are all natural faux pas behaviors that will come out of all of us. Nobody's perfect. But when it goes to an extreme, and any one of these 4 can go to an extreme very quickly, and it can be very obvious to the one that's not actually demonstrating that warning sign, that's when you know you need to step in and do something about it.
Okay. All right. So we have some warning signs, some particular indicators that we can look at to notice it in other people when ego seems to be the issue. More importantly, I think for us as leaders, we can maybe begin to start seeing that in ourselves. If we're on teams, it can become part of how we talk with one another so that we keep egos in check and we move forward. But if these 4 indicators kind of show us, hey, we've got a problem, then the next step is we've got to move towards solution, mm-hmm. Which is actually where we are going to pick up in our next interview. When ego is the issue, we've defined it, we've seen it. Then what do we do so that we move forward to a place where ego is truly an asset in our work, brings all the strength that it's supposed to bring to our team, without the negatives and the downsides associated with it. So Tune in next time for part 2 of our interview together around ego in the workplace.